Call to order the Plan Commission special meeting of August 31.
Here.
Here.
Mr. Grady?
Here.
Mrs. Bishop?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Mr. Holly?
Here.
And Ms. Bishop, previously informed staff that we are available this evening.
All right, thank you. Plan Commissioners, I'm welcoming back this evening Mike Foster. With that, we'll go on with item number 3, correction and or approval of the minutes from July 29.
To approve the minutes from July 27th.
Mrs. Bishop has made the motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Coots. Any discussion? Those, we'll proceed with the roll call vote.
Mrs. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Grady?
Abstain.
Mrs. Bishop?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Abstain.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Item number 4, questions and public comment. The public may address the commission at this time regarding items on the agenda unless the item is the subject of a public hearing. If your comments pertain to public hearing, please hold your comments for public hearing. We do have one public hearing this evening, number 5, conditional use request for outdoor storage and servicing of campers at 415 North C.P. Avenue. Applicant Todd Oberg, owner, SJS Land Holding LLC, managing member Steve Sterwald. Comment is made at this time on items that are not on the agenda if you have registered as for the meeting. The state's open meeting law discourages action by the commission on items not listed on the agenda. Comments limited to 3 minutes. Address when starting the comments. Podium, available online. Like your name and address in the chat feature. Did anyone register with the city clerk? Register with comments during this portion of the meeting. Comments at this time or anyone comments? Conditional use request from applicant Todd Oberg for outdoor storage and servicing campers at 415 North C.P. Avenue, parcel 246-0713-1243082, owner SJS Land Holding LLC, managing member Steve Sterwald. I'd like to begin the public hearing. I'd like to have a overview of the conditional use request by consulting planner Justin Wolf.
Thank you, Pam. So this site is located on CP Avenue. This is a site that has had a building located on it for a number of years.
Pam, can you mute your mic?
The property is zoned industrial. The proposed use is for storage and service of non-motorized recreational trailers on the site. There, as I mentioned, is an existing 7,000 square foot building. That's where the service is proposed to be formed. There is some paved area on the site. That is where storage trailers and waiting service are intended. Some other paved areas where they will have employee parking. The site is surrounded by a 6-foot-high chain link fence. Some of the land uses around it are Daybreak Foods in the north. There is storage to the south. Aggressive Metals is to the south or southwest of it. And then across Owen is some residential uses in the area. The proposed activities are permitted by conditional use. There are some things that we can talk about under discussion as it relates to the site plan. In a nutshell, they're proposing to continue their service operations from their site on Tarina Road. The hours of operations are proposed to be between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and there will be about 8 to 10 employees on site at a time. Certainly. A detailed memo has been provided to everyone and it's certainly been made available online. The recommendations that are coming from staff really just align with what the requirements in the zoning code are, specific to storage areas, screening, and then and parking and employees. We don't allow by code parking in required setback areas, so those areas need to be defined. We require parking to be on hard surface areas. That needs to be defined. These are all things that can be readily addressed. Site plan can provide for that detail. So just focusing on the parking areas, there should be demarcation on the pavement of where the trailers will be stored. Make it clear that that's what would be approved of conditional use, and to make it clear that that storage area is located outside of any required setbacks. So just having the pavement is not enough because there is more pavement out there. Again, when this site was developed many years ago, it predated our zoning code. Rather than just have them take out pavement where we wouldn't allow it at this time, just merely demarcating where the storage is. Pavement marking would be sufficient. Say this is where you can store vehicles awaiting service. Similarly, where they are going to have parking stalls for employees should be demarcated. Again, we require pavement marking to delineate those stalls and to ensure that there isn't enough of them. This is rather low-hanging fruit, we feel, to readily comply with the code. If future improvements are made to the site, we would have different discussions about some of the removal of parking, of pavement areas. We fully anticipate that they would be successful and they would want to require improvements to that end, new asphalt, and then with more asphalt would come stormwater. To demarcate where and how that hard surface is going to be used to ensure compliance with the conditional use and the code requirements. The next significant issue is screening. We do require screening because there's existing fencing out there. There certainly is the opportunity to put some slatting in there. It's important to note that the fence is located immediately on the property line. That does not comply with the city's code requirements for fencing. Fencing can't be placed on a property line, and especially fencing that has barbed wire on it. But we do respect that they are going to want to use that. And so we have provided some thoughts on how combinations of fencing and landscape material can be, or plantings can be used to provide effective screening, kind of at the entry to the facility, and then from Owen where the residential is. We're certainly not going to hide anything that might be stored on site, and that isn't the intention. One of the things is we do require landscaping, and there is none on the site. While there's a lot of green area, there really isn't any landscaping. The trees that are out there are located on an adjacent site, so every user is required to provide their own landscaping. We are asking for some modest landscaping that could be developed in concert with the city staff to find what's adequate combination of materials and to meet any kind of needs or budgets that they may have. We're asking that landscaping be placed immediately inside the fence. In certain areas, because it's on the property line, so we can't have them planting in the public right-of-way. And that, with the combination of slatting, will provide effective screening for the site and meet our code requirements. It's expected that if there are future improvements on the site, at that time we would ask them to bring the fencing in compliance with the zoning code. But if they're not making those improvements for years from now, again, no need to require them to remove the fence and relocate it. But if they're going to make significant improvements in the future, meaning more paved surface and such, at that time we would evaluate it. If the landscaping is immediately behind the fence, and within 6 or 7 feet of the fence itself, that would meet the requirement for future screening. The fencing could be then relocated to the other side of it. We don't allow pavement or parking within 7 feet of the fence of the property line, regardless. So again, looking in the future, there's a way to make this happen. And again, we're asking for some modest screening at this time. Some of the other items that we've outlined in here are that the hours of operation be clearly listed as 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday as they've requested. Again, clarifying outdoor storage has to be on a hard surface area and outside of required setbacks. Pavement markings, as we discussed. Vegetation and slatting for screening. Servicing of trailers should only be performed indoors and not include motorized vehicles or RVs. That's a different requirement. And again, the petitioner has said these are going to be non-motorized. And then if there was any comments from police or fire, that those should be included, and anything from engineering or public works. I have not received anything to that, so I don't think there's anything to add. But we are recommending approval with a series of conditions and some site clarifications, modifications.
The public hearing is open. Does anyone wish to make a public comment? If so, then, excuse me, but where exactly do they speak? I don't see a podium. Or is it that short thing there? Ah, the podium, yes, thank you. And then sign in your name and address, and then also announce your name and address for the clerk.
All right, everybody hear me okay? Well, again, I appreciate everybody's time today. I know this was kind of a uniquely special called meeting for what we're trying to do here. So again, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to come and listen here a little bit. My name's Todd Oberg. I own Country Campers. It's now called Fathead's Country Campers. My nickname as a kid was Fathead. So when I bought it, it was around for over 20 years, and I just put Fathead in front of it, little tongue in cheek to that there. But we've been growing rapidly. We've expanded the business significantly since the prior ownership was there. I bought it in 2014 now. I've got 26 employees. The vast majority are from the area here. Got a really good crew there. And the business is only as good as the team that you have. We've now become the largest dealer in the state, believe it or not. The volume that we go through there outpaces Gander RV, Burlington, and some of the bigger outfits in the state. So we're real proud of that. And our challenge has been space for the last few years. We just have a very tiny lot there. We've been fortunate that the city has allowed us to lease the old Planar building, the old factory down there. But frankly, it's just becoming very difficult over the course of winter to operate that property and manage it effectively for my teams. So that's the biggest driver of us wanting to have a solution prior to winter, ideally, where I can take my team and what we're doing there, which is basically servicing trailers only. I don't operate engines. We don't dispose of oil, no hazardous materials. It's just simply travel trailers. And that's our bread and butter. That's where we excel. So the goal is to simply take that business that's operated there and relocate it in the CP Avenue property. So my technicians would be in there. We move trailers with forklifts so we can get very detailed and very precise, getting them inside the building and parked appropriately. The building is nicely amenitied with heat, power, soon to be Wi-Fi, phone systems, things like that. So it's going to be a fully functional setup. It's got multiple bathrooms, a break room, offices, a check-in area with a counter for customers to come in and drop their unit off and meet with my service advisor teams. It's going to be a nice, functional service environment, very friendly, very customer savvy, very easy in and easy out. And that's our goal. We want it to be safe, clean, and simple. And this could be a stopgap, or it could be something that we look to continue to build on in that area there. So I would like to start very simply over there, meaning that if some of these conditions can be pushed out a little bit or waived, or if we have to do them all at the onset, that's fine as well. Our goal would be to get in there before winter. I'd like to get everything moved over, my team over there before winter hits, before the cold weather hits, and that way we got a very functional, nice place for my team to work that's heated and, you know, not falling apart with leaky roofs and everything else that's going over there at that old Planar building. So that's kind of the goal. And beyond that, you know, we are looking to continue to expand. So I've got other plans in motion in the area. So this was all a new experience to me, so I apologize if the initial condition document wasn't filled out like to scale. So we did have, I think, the Meat and Hunt guys do a little bit more work. It was a little bit of a surprise on Friday when I got a $2,300 invoice from them. So I would prefer, going forward, maybe a little more communication along the path, that if I'm not completing something properly and more times involved, I would like to know when I'm burning my nickel, you know, going forward on that kind of stuff. I'm not a developer, so I don't have a CAD guy next to me or an architect over here. So I think these condition applications are kind of designed maybe for a developer, which I am not a professional developer. I'm a business owner, and I have a full-time job running this business. I have a second location in Wisconsin Rapids. So getting to this point, I greatly appreciate everybody's cooperation just to get here. So any questions for me? We'd really like to move on this and obviously, you know, get going with all the planning that's a part of something like this. It's a fairly big project, as you guys can all imagine. So. Well, that was easy. There's no questions? Sure.
Is there anything in the recommendations that you are hesitating in?
Well, I didn't know until Friday that 7-foot-high evergreens were a part of the equation. I thought privacy fencing would be enough, but I think the architects felt that the building and the blacktop area is elevated. So as the lot kind of sinks a little bit towards Owen Avenue where there's residential properties, that if somebody's sitting on their deck having a fermented beverage after work and they look out, the sliding fencing is not going to be high enough to block their view. So that was a little bit of a surprise. So I immediately called some companies and tried to get some estimates on that too. So all told, it looks like we're adding about $50,000, maybe $40,000 to the price of purchasing the property by the conditions. As a small business owner, I mean, it is what it is. So I understand it. It's just one of those things that going forward, if I want to continue to expand this area, I need to understand all those costs so I can factor it into our planning. Obviously, I can look at other communities and other areas too for the business. We are going to continue to grow, and I don't see that slowing or changing anytime soon. And as a business owner, I've got to look at plan A, B, and C across the board. The community's been great. It's been very supportive. But I really have to continue to look out for our best interest in how we continue to grow this and what's going to be the most effective way to do that. So.
So I did have a question here, and it's sort of a point of clarification about hazardous material, things like that. Are you looking at most of your work being done on newer trailers, things like that, or are you going to have trailers coming in there that need service and potentially end up with some biohazards like a dump issue, or you have to clean out their...
No, we have scrap people, so any of our appliances, whether it be a refrigerator, an air conditioner, I have scrap guys that come pick that up once a month, and they dispose of it. They actually mine the metals out of it and actually sell them. So it works out well. I don't dispose of trailers. We service them, and the customers pick them up and get them gone. So I'm not going to have anything in this area stored for long periods of time. This industry, like a lot of industries now, is really challenged with getting parts. So occasionally something will have to sit for a few weeks until I can get parts in. But ultimately the goal is to fix it and get it in the hands of our customers and get it out the door.
Sure.
So yeah, in all of our like air conditioners and refrigerators, they're all enclosed. So there is no Freon or any kind of fluids or anything like that at all. We don't change oils. We don't do any engine work whatsoever. I actually partner with a local gentleman here at Ryan's Auto, and he do all of our referred engine work on any motorhomes that we might be doing some business with.
So will you do any winterizing, de-winterizing?
We do, and we use antifreeze that is environmentally friendly and alcohol free and minus 50 degrees. And we actually store that in the trailers. And this is the antifreeze that you can actually drain into the ground. It's environmentally friendly, and it's all tagged with the big tag on it that confirms that. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I figured I'd ask that question because it's right next to the Rock Creek, so.
Yeah, believe me, we take a hard look at that too, and we drain very little. What we're doing, and when we winterize, is basically filling it up. The customer, and we don't put that much in it. The customers then take the unit. They don't need to bring it back in the spring. They just simply flush it themselves.
Right.
So at the first camping trip, they just put a hose, flush it out. It's going right into their sewer anyhow. So.
Okay, that's all I had. Thanks.
Yep.
I had two questions, if that's okay. Okay, Mr. Oberg, thank you for being here and speaking with us. My two questions are, first off, what is your affiliation with the property owner?
Word got out in the area that I was looking for property, and he showed up at the door one day. And then I said, where is it? Up there? I said, let's go look at it. I actually leased the property a few winters ago for just like 3 months, and you guys actually approved a waiver to allow us to do that. So we stored some trailers up there for a few months because we have this thing called winter, and we have to get our trailers up here for our customers over the winter. None of them want to pick it up in the wintertime, so we have to kind of store them until March, April, May when the weather breaks. A lot of times I'm scrambling around in the spring in the wintertime to just find places to park them. So Steve was gracious enough to do that. Beyond that, it wasn't listed with a broker, but I had been putting the word out that I really am starving for property. And Steve showed up one day and basically said, come on, let's look at it, and that's where we went from there.
So to clarify, are you currently leasing the property?
Oh, no, I'm not even affiliated with that property at all.
Okay, so you don't own it and you're not leasing it?
I'm sorry, the CP Avenue property?
Yes.
We have no affiliation with that property.
Okay.
Yep. The request is I have an accepted offer to purchase back in June. So it's taken me the process here to get the conditional use permit in front of you guys, so I can now do all the things like close on the property, get all the project planning, the technology involved, all the things next should this go forward.
I understand. And then my next question is, what is your estimate of the traffic that will now be coming down the road for your business?
So as I said in the memorandum there too, it's usually we have at any given time about 15 trailers in for service. That can vary a little bit depending on the time of year. With winterizing, that's a quick process. Those are done in 45 minutes. The customer usually waits or goes and has breakfast somewhere in the area and they're gone. So as far as traffic, I don't envision it being anything extensive. We had been parking some trailers across from the Tyrolina Brewery over the course of the last few winters, and now they're simply coming an extra couple of blocks, down to this property, going forward. So we usually have maybe 2 or 3 service drops and pickups a day, And that'll get a little bit more frequent on a Friday or Saturday. So maybe 4 or 5 units that are being dropped off or picked up. And after hours pickups will simply happen at our current location on Highway V. And then our team will be delivering that trailer to our service area the next morning. So there shouldn't be any significant traffic challenges there. I do know that from about 3 o'clock to 4:15, the out-of-school traffic is pretty intense going east on Highway V to that stop sign on Highway A there. So we try to avoid that. Sometimes it's better to even go around the whole community just to avoid that line there. So.
I have one follow-up question based on that. Mr. Oberg, you mentioned that you said something in your submission. However, I only have the memo from Dustin Wolf here. Was there any other documentation that you submitted that you wanted us to consider tonight that maybe we don't have in front of us?
I'm not familiar with the process here, but I submitted everything and then I got it all back when it was released on Friday. So I printed it off. It had aerial diagrams, scale drawing pictures of where my team would park their cars. I think they went so far as to even scale drawings of where I park campers inside to perform service on them. I think they even wanted to know like where, I'm just but all the drawings were there and it was pretty detailed, including the recommendations about evergreens and slatted fencing and things like that. As soon as I got wind of that maybe being a condition, I went out and tried to get some estimates for those right away. So I want to be prepared.
Thank you.
Ms. Lazaris, if you could turn your microphone on, please.
The last thing I want to add is we as we've grown, we're probably going to sell almost 900 trailers this year, and we expect to even increase next year. And we draw a lot into the community here. We draw a lot of people that come in, they shop, they have fun, they enjoy the area, they love Lake Mills, they wander downtown, they'll stop for lunch or breakfast, they fill up for gas. So, I just want to make sure that context is in place here too. I think we're a valuable resource to the community. I know we've got things to handle as far as growth and things like that, but I just want to make sure that that's something that we're all aware of here too. So.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Oberg. Did anyone else wish to speak right now?
I'm Sherry Wagner. I'm online here. And I'm with Lilac Springs, who's just kind of north of this property, at 403 O'Neill Street, there in Lake Mills. And I just had both some questions, so I don't know if he wants to stay up there, and some comments, I guess. And I guess one of the first questions, which like I said, he may need to circle back, was just what the quantity of trailers that is going to be stored at the property one time. He kind of may have answered that, but just like typically how many trailers are going to be outside at any given time typically.
Outside there waiting for service, anywhere from 10 to 15.
Typically, it's usually 10 to 15 that are waiting for service at any given time. I've got 9 technicians, so we generally get them in and get them through the service department fairly quickly.
Okay, and then I know it was mentioned that parking is only on hard surfaces, so that would be pavement only. I guess when I first got the notice, I just wanted to make sure like there's obviously a lot of green space and grass right now that like trailers wouldn't fill up that whole green space. Obviously in the future, if more areas paved, that may be the case. But so for right now, it's only hard surfaces of what the pavement's there. And I guess I just want to make sure they can't just like add gravel somewhere, pavement, and kind of expand without going back through the process.
That's what I understand. I understand gravel is not allowed. I understand parking will be conditional only on the pavement, so that is correct.
Yes, if it is approved as submitted, any future expansion would require to come back through the conditional use process to amend it.
Okay, perfect. And then my only comment, I'm not opposed to this being at the property, but I guess my main thing would just be regarding the screening on that north end along there, just because it does about residential, the assisted living property as well as others that are in visibility there. And I guess my question, looking at the memo, was I know there's the slatted screening kind of outlined in orange, and I just wondered, and I guess didn't know the reason for the stop-start points there, and if it would look odd having it start and stop versus going along the hallway. I was just kind of confused on that aspect. If there was any reasoning behind those orange slatted locations, because the one facing kind of our north, the assisted living property, is just kind of in the middle randomly. So I'm just curious.
So our landscape architect, Brian Carranza, reviewed this from on-site and off-site, and was trying to put together a combination screening and slatting proposal that would provide good sightline mitigation. Again, we're not going to be able to hide things, but we do want to soften views to them. The expectation then would be, if there was expansion, that fencing would be relocated, additional plantings would be brought in, and such. But the key kind of identified areas for vegetation was what he felt was the best locations to mitigate those sight lines from the users to the kind of north to the west.
Okay, and yeah, I guess I just don't get why there's not vegetation through, like, behind that orange along the north, and just kind of that whole, I'll call it north. I know it's on a little bit of an odd angle, but let's just say north property line, that the vegetation wouldn't just extend across there. And I guess it'd more so be my hope that it could. And I didn't know if it's like a single row of trees, or if it's, kind of two rows offset. I guess I would just be in favor of additional screening just on that north side. Obviously, the other uses surrounding this property coincides just fine with, the rest of it. So, I don't know that screening anywhere else is, that imperative besides where it's shown, but I don't know. I think that north property line, which is a shorter property line at least, having the additional screening, I think would be beneficial. Like I said, I'm not opposed to this use or anything like that. I just do think the screening along that, where it abuts the residential area, would be beneficial, especially because these are being stored outside. It's not like it's just a building. They're also stored outside. So I guess that was kind of my main comment.
So I would just like to know that answer then, so I'm not moving forward with surprise expenses here. So I would like it better defined, and I'd like Mead and Hunt, preferably, being that I've already brought up a bill there, to tell me what kind of foot lineage here are we talking about for trees, for greenage. That's not clear to me. So it's not clear to me.
The typical process is the petitioner would work with their own landscape people to develop a plan. What we have highlighted here is that the city staff, likely Brian Carranza from Mead and Hunt, who's a landscape architect, would work with you and an area arborist or supply company to develop a plan that meets our code requirements. The code is very clear as to what the screening requirements are, and to ensure the appropriate types of plantings that will provide the most effective combination of screening. The sites that were shown for the vegetative screens were where there would be direct sight lines from, there's a multifamily to the north and some single family and duplexes to the kind of south and west. The slatting would have the greatest view from, there's an assisted living facility in there, but no one really has direct views from that side of the assisted living facility. So that's why the slatting vegetative combination was chosen in that way. But again, a landscape plan has not yet been developed, and that was one of the conditions of approval, to see what is the best combination of planting types to meet code requirements and budgetary constraints.
Okay.
And I guess I wanted to add too that right now the assisted living that, is just shown off that map that you said, for the sight lines, there is the potential right now it's shown as just a vacant lot where you can see on the screening page, I'll say, but that, was originally approved for a secondary assisted living that would come up to closer to that property line, and then otherwise it is zoned for multifamily, and that use has also been looked at. So, that is zoned for residential multifamily and will likely in the future have, whether it's multifamily or potentially the second assisted living building that was previously approved where the sight lines would be greater. And I guess that's more so why I'm saying that one, north property line, just having the vegetative buffer across the whole thing versus having this gap in the middle, just really didn't make sense to me. So I guess I would ask staff to just relook at that and reconsider that, to have a full buffer along that. Again, it's abutting a residential, multiple residential sites there. And so I guess that's the one property line that I'm most, conscientious of from that standpoint. Just
Ms. Lazarus, it's important to note that any future development, now that site was approved 7 years ago at least, and nothing has moved forward on it. It's also important to note that any development on that would also be required to provide a vegetative screening adjacent to the other uses. So again, it won't just be the industrial site that would have to provide screening. Any future development over there would provide similar screening. And again, at this juncture, planting trees for the sake of planting trees when we don't know what a future development plan on the site is doesn't seem productive. We know that if there is growth, then we will need to evaluate the remainder of the undeveloped site. And at that time, we would look at again, relocating the fencing and then additional screening on that end of the site. But to go in and suddenly require a significant amount of plantings when we don't have a full understanding of what's planned for the site, I think would be a bit premature. What's being proposed, the planting areas that are being proposed, should effectively meet our code requirements, because we do allow combinations of fencing, walls, fencing, and plantings to meet our screening criteria.
So just so I'm clear then, where there's vegetation, there's not slatting, or slatting and vegetation?
Just vegetation in those areas, slatting in between.
Mr. Wolf, correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm reading this, it says that screening materials such as plantings may not exceed the height of the fence.
It will over time. So our minimum planting size for evergreen materials is 7 feet. That's why that was mentioned. That's a code requirement. The same as there is a minimum diameter inches for any standard trees. There are minimum planting sizes for shrubs. Right? Someone can't go out there and plant a half-gallon sized shrub and say, I've met my requirement. No, it has to have a certain hardiness. In time, obviously the landscaping material will grow. It will get taller. The height of the items being stored on there could range. I imagine they won't be taller than 13 feet. That'd be pretty rare. But somewhere in the 8 to 10, 11 foot range is probably common. You will see the edges of them. You will see them at early on in the planting until the materials have a certain level of maturity. And we don't use landscaping to hide something. We're trying to soften edges and mitigate sight lines. Daybreak to the north, which developed decades and decades ago, right, is all parking lot and all screening. We would not allow that today, right? It's all pavement, it's all loading docks. We would require screening and other things at this time. When this site developed, again, it was under a completely different set of rules. Now that certain proposals are being made on the site, small steps need to be taken to come into compliance with the code. And it is always a balancing act on meeting code regulations without being onerous. Right? We feel that a certain balance can be met here with being budget friendly, to enable an operation to get up and running and to make certain improvements to comply with our code regulations. But to Mr. Foster's point, you will see them. You'll see the materials being stored on site, the trailers being stored on site until a certain maturity comes in on that screening. The reverse of this is we don't want a situation where we just have slatting as the only screening mechanism. There's a reason that the code is very clear on how screening is supposed to be handled, and it's combinations of materials rather than just slatting a chain link fence and then kind of forgetting about what's behind it. And we have to keep in mind the chain link fence does not comply with the current requirements, but it would be, I think, a bit onerous to require someone to completely remove and replace a chain link fence when all of their activities are confined to the farthest edge, the farthest east edge of the site. When they go westward, when more investment is being made in the site, then we would work with the property owner or the petitioner on bringing other areas of the site into compliance. Right? If there was lighting being proposed out there, we'd be having conversations about the lighting, but lighting hasn't been proposed on the site. So, right, but we have lighting requirements. We would talk about those at that time. So we're trying to strike that balance of enabling an operation to move into an existing site that doesn't necessarily meet all of our code requirements because of the timing in which it was previously developed, while bringing something closer to conformance with our code.
Thank you for that. That was my question, was really geared towards the property right across the way, and you hit the nail right on the head of what I was trying to get the point across. They have the trailers stored out there and there's no screening and stuff like that. So thank you for clarifying why that is.
And thanks for answering the questions and clarification on things. I think that was all I have. I guess I would just ask staff to consider adding 5 or 6 evergreen trees across the orange slatted area where right now there's no vegetation figured for, that abuts the northern property line that is, adjacent to all the residential uses across there. So that would be, the only thing to add. So thank you for your time.
Ms. Lazarus,
Thank you, Ms. Wagner.
I'm sorry, I have one more question for Mr. Oberg, if I can.
Mr. Foster, yeah, please, Mr. Foster.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Foster, yeah, please, Mr. Foster.
So my question is this, as you're looking at the recommendations that are put out there, which one of those is the most costly for you?
Well, some of these are fairly new, so my estimates have been literally phone calls. They haven't come out and looked at things other than one of the fencing companies in the area that came out and did take some measurements about slatting that, and that is a pricey endeavor, no doubt. Potentially having to move the fence is also going to be probably extremely expensive. But again, I think that is something that would be a possible future modification to the conditional use. So it's tough to say right now just because it's early, with just, I wasn't sure to the extent of the vegetation needed until Friday, basically. So
Okay.
I did get a slatting estimate for the entire fence line. So modifying that with the vegetation is something I can probably have by the end of the week, a little more clearer picture, having them come out and take measurements and have a better picture of that. And then I can represent that if needed or whatever it may be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're still in public hearing. Are there any further comments regarding this request? Are there any further public comments under item number 5? Does anyone else wish to speak to this request? All right, hearing none, the public hearing is closed. And we go on to item number 6, discussion recommendation on conditional use request from Todd Oberg for outdoor storage and servicing campers at 415 North CP Avenue, parcel number 24607131243-082, owner SJS Land Holding LLC, managing member Steve Sterwald. So, Plan Commissioners, we are in discussion. Does anyone have any questions or comments of the applicants or staff at this time? Plan Commissioners, we do have Plan Commission Motion 2181 before us. SJS Land Holding LLC, Steve Sterwald, 415 North CP Avenue, parcel 24607131243-082. This motion sets forth the city's zoning authority under Wisconsin state statutes. That Chapter 660 of the City Code does contain certain requirements for conditional uses. The conditional use application for outdoor storage and recreation equipment service in the I-1 Industrial District. The review by city staff, tonight's public hearing, and review by Plan Commission. This motion does provide for Plan Commission recommendation to the City Council to approve the conditional use subject to 1. The petitioners meeting all code requirements and conditions set forth in the planner's memo. And second, there are certain findings that must be confirmed by the Plan Commission, to which this motion is also subject to, which are A, the conditional use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. B, the conditional use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the vicinity or substantially diminish and impair or impair property values. C, conditional use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding property. D, there are adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and or other necessary facilities. E, ingress and egress will be so designed as to minimize traffic congestion in the public street. F, the conditional use shall conform to applicable regulations of the district in which it is located. G, the conditional use will be in harmony with the purposes, goals, objectives, policies, and standards of the City of Lake Mills Comprehensive Plan. H, potential public benefits of the proposed conditional use outweigh any and all potential adverse impacts.
Yes, Ms.
Mrs.
Lazaris, I
Bishop.
didn't want to interrupt you while you're reading. Were you going to move on to call for a motion, or were we still in the discussion phase? Okay.
Well, we're still in discussion, of course.
I didn't want to miss that if you were moving on quicker than I was ready, so I'll wait, and I just had one point before we move forward onto a vote.
Okay, go ahead, Mrs. Bishop. Go ahead with your comment.
Okay, well, I'm having a procedural issue here, and I do see that the city attorney is on, so he can hopefully correct me if I'm wrong. But reading through the city code here, I had it and then I turned it around. Here it is. What I'm seeing is that a petition of the owner is required for a conditional use request. And Mr. Oberg, the petitioner, made clear that he has no relationship or no affiliation to the property, so he has no ownership interest in the property. And I'm concerned then that he has no legal standing to be making this request. So that's the procedural issue that I'm having. Yes, Mr. Oberg, the procedural issue that I'm having here is that you do not currently own this property, and per our code, under the procedure, an initiation of request for approval of a conditional use shall be initiated by a petition of the owner of the subject property, and you are not currently the owner. And so my concern is that a conditional use would run the land, not.
I'm not a person that invests in something without permission to use it. It's
Sure.
called common prudent business practice. So I don't know if the attorney can address that.
I wasn't saying you weren't, I was just saying per the code, you don't have the legal standing as the owner, so that's
So-
my concern here.
If I can clarify,
Mr. Wolf,
so when an application is made, it is provided by the property owner and the applicant, who may be agent. In this case, he is agent. The property owner has signed the application. So that's the standing. And he also has an offer, accepted offer in on the property, which also should give him standing under our requirements.
That
We would not
also
allow,
is for a limited period of time.
but we would not let a petition come before you where a property owner has not signed off on the application.
Well, it's certainly hard to know that when I don't have any document here from the property owner, so that's why I bring about that concern. So, Mr. Wolf, you're telling me that the petition is in fact signed by SJS Holding or an authorized representative of SJS Holding?
That is something that is cleared by the city staff and the attorney. It's not something we have typically provided to the Plan Commission, but certainly if that's something you'd like to see in the future, we can certainly make it a part of the package.
I think it's a threshold issue for the application, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Lazares.
I thank you. Plan Commissioners, are there any further questions or comments regarding this request or the proposed motion?
I just have one question. What's the typical level of urgency for moving these things forward? Because it seems like Mr. Oberg was concerned about making sure that these things get run through. So what's a typical, from the point of approval, when do they need to have some of these measures in place?
So if this was approved as submitted with the conditions that the staff has requested, it would then go to the council at their next available meeting, which I think is next week. And if they took it up with the same conditions, then those conditions need to be satisfied before he can be in operation. So as a part of his permitting process, we would satisfy those requirements. So really it's, to finish the approval process is a couple of weeks. Before he would be in operation would be more dictated by him closing on the property and submitting it for permits, which is to satisfy the conditions.
Just to clarify too, as a business owner, this has been a little onerous. Number one, I didn't know the extent. I'm not a developer, as I said. The accepted offer was way back in June, and we're now looking at 100 days. I've got pre-approval from a local bank to make this purchase contingent upon conditional use being approved. So the fact that we're probably going to be out almost 90 to 120 days, I may have to go spend an additional appraisal amount of money to refresh that. So if there was a recommendation, if there's any way that my business has been here for 30 years, okay, I've owned it for 7, if there's a way to put together the application and have maybe a more abbreviated direct conversation about what we'd like to do, that would be ideal. I'm just sharing my feedback. There's just a lot of planning steps that are part of a project like this, and anything that we could do to maybe simplify it for somebody that's not building, that just simply is moving my business, that would be ideal. Just a comment.
And Mr. Wolf or the city attorney, Dan, if you guys could comment about that, please.
Well, this is Dan. I'm not exactly sure what you'd like me to comment on there.
I'm curious about if some of these recommendations can be delayed, I suppose. He could have the purchase, but there'd be a moratorium for him to move these things forward so he can be in operation. I'm just curious about putting that precedent, and if that's a problem.
It would be my commentary that the requirements being placed on the property are not onerous. They would not inhibit his ability to satisfy them quite readily. You're talking about pavement marking, which is painting on a pavement, and some landscaping. So he need to, again, develop a plan with us and then execute it with probably a local nursery to come in and or a local landscaping company to do the installation. Those are things that certainly can be handled quickly. They don't have to be satisfied necessarily before he closes or on the property. It's a requirement to operation, right? So he can close on the property tomorrow, but to operate and satisfy his operation, have occupancy, he would need to satisfy those.
Just to clarify that, in the industry now, in any industry right now, parts are extremely delayed. There's at least a 6-week lead time for slatted fencing, for example. So we're probably looking at October, November before I'd be operationally allowed to get in there. So that could be a deal killer right out of the gate. I'll have to assess that when I leave here with my team. So it's just one of those things that start to finish here, we're looking at almost 5 months. And that just is making me reconsider where I want to continue to grow my business, because there are some challenges here. If going forward, I want to continue to grow and invest and build. How long is this going to take, and what are the processes here that need approval? And it's definitely something I have to consider.
So we're transitioning from site and operation planning into building inspection. And there certainly is the ability to have temporary occupancy as you're satisfying certain requirements. No different than if you built a house, but you can't put in your grass because you want occupancy in December, right? But you still have to have a seeded lawn, so you get temporary occupancy, you don't get permanent occupancy until a later date, right? So again, there are things that can be done in that regard. Again, I don't think asking for some plantings and some slatting and some pavement marking is really a cost prohibitive or onerous requirement to operate a business. This was not a turnkey site, and I think it should have been evident to anyone who was evaluating it that there was going to need to be some improvements on site to comply with local codes and ordinances, as any business would have to comply with. And again, from our perspective, he will be through the approval process next week should the council approve it. From there, it's whatever he's doing on closing on the property and submitting for any permits that he needs to actually make the physical improvements.
So to your question earlier, we're looking at an additional roughly $50,000 and probably at least 2 to 3 more months to order product and get it all here to satisfy the conditions so we can then operate on the facility. So
I can't speak for when he engaged in his process to negotiate and acquire the property versus when he came before us to look to be operating and to get use. So
But
I can't reconcile that issue.
What I'm hearing you say is if there's a need, there could be a temporary operation that he could apply for?
As a part of the building permit process and to get occupation of the site, yes, they will look at the conditions and they will see, because I don't know what needs to be done inside the building.
Right.
We don't evaluate that here. So I don't know if there's any requirements there. Only the building inspector will tell you that for commercial structure. But he does have to submit for occupancy for that structure, and they will tell him whatever those requirements are. From the exterior and the use perspective, that's this process, and it will be satisfied next week.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf, for that perspective.
We would look, we have historically allowed conditional uses to operate without being fully compliant. And then look at it after certain periods of time to say, yes, you've met your requirements, or no, you haven't. And then say, we're going to shut you down because you haven't met it. But we try and be as cooperative as getting them in as possible, especially under the extreme circumstances that we face today. The other issue is that, well, it's nice to talk about the unusual costs. The code requires them. So it's not like we have an option of saying, no, you don't have to. This is the way these things need to be done, and we proceed from there, and we'll try and provide as much leeway within the process as we can. But the code is clear that those things have to be put in.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So
Just so
keep this in mind, gents, and Kathy, Catherine. We set those policies, we set those plans, we set those codes. So if it does get to a point where we're feeling it's onerous and it's causing problems and it's causing business owners to leave, it's up to us to rewrite that and send that through the city council. So while the staff does say, this is what the code says, they have to say that because we set it. So it's up to us to change it if we want it to be changed. Now, we could also put in the condition here on this conditional use that all conditions must be met within 6 months of occupancy and operation. And then if the council says that's okay, they'll approve it, and then Mr. Oberg can start operating, and then we'll have the staff and the building folks look at it to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think that's what Mr. Wilkie was referring to. But it couldn't hurt to have something inside the motion saying that, give them a time limit, say you can operate based on this conditional use, and you have to fulfill the requirements by 6 or 8 months. So that's something we could do. We could make that amendment to it.
May I also ask for clarification? So once the conditional use permit, should it be approved, then I would need to apply for an occupancy permit, correct? And that's another permitting process that would need to go through this same procedure?
No.
All right, sorry, that's just never been clear to me. No one explained that to me, where we need to go here next. So what's that step and how long does that take and what does that involve? Potentially more additional expenditure from me? Should the building have to be up to code electrically or?
Well, again, I don't know the condition of the building, and I don't know if you've had it reviewed for your operations and had conversations with building inspection about it, because not all buildings meet.
Okay.
If it was a restaurant versus,
Right.
So again, I don't know what you've done today.
I don't own the property currently.
Yeah.
This is all contingent upon conditional use and obviously occupancy being approved.
If you were painting on the site, right, again, I don't know if that's what you're doing, but you're painting, right, you have to have ventilation. You have to have an enclosure and ventilation. I don't know if this has that, and I don't know if that's what you're doing. So that is an issue that has to be resolved with building inspection, right, on the use of the building and the condition it's in. So I can't comment on what's necessary in that regard.
You did make some comments about things you were adding to the building, though. So you need to talk to the building inspector, because that would be something that might need a building permit, might not. But that's something you need to go with. And then if you get a building permit,
We're not changing or modifying the building whatsoever.
yeah, you said you were doing some computer work, and there'll probably be some wiring.
I'm adding Wi-Fi, that's it. I mean,
Okay.
Wi-Fi router.
No.
Do I need a building permit for that?
No.
Okay. I mean, we're not doing anything other than moving in our operations there. So I'm not doing any construction. There's no there's already, so I guess I just wasted 3 months not knowing then that I needed to get these guys involved. So how do I go about as a business owner in the community that wants to expand, having somebody take me through the steps that are needed to do this right and condense it into a process that is something I can manage effectively with my team, rather than this discovery thing and things showing up in the mail with $2,300 bills to them and not knowing that occupancy and building inspectors need to be involved. I mean, is it just me being naive, or should there be a more educational process and somebody stepping through it?
I'm hoping that everybody's mic is off. the code is out there and it gives you all the permits that are required. If we start advising you on everything that needs to be done, then at some point in time you will accuse us of misguiding you and taking you down the wrong road. We prefer that you hire someone that reads the code for you, generally an architect or a planner or an engineer, and works you through the system, or even a lawyer, and works you through the system to find out, okay, yes, you need to tell them that you're doing a building permit. Yes, you need to tell them that you're doing conditional use. Yes, you need to tell them that you're doing some type of occupancy or zoning changes. So we usually try and capture those up front. You know, when you submit a permit, the first one that's submitted is a zoning permit. That's part of a building permit. Once you get through the zoning permit, it actually rolls to the building permit. But we can't tell under all circumstances what you intend to do. So it's generally, if you come in and give us a conditional use permit, we're going to act on the conditional use permit. The more information you give us in that conditional use permit, the better we can advise you. But you know, it generally takes a pretty substantial set of documents within the process to be able for us to say, this is what you need, and this is how you should move forward.
Okay.
And so
I mean, that's fine. I mean, my conditional use permit was turned in fully in July. I mean, so, you know.
I'm sorry, I'm actually going to comment on that. You submitted some materials in July. You did not have, and let me make this clear, you did not have a completed application, which is why the city manager asked Mead and Hunt to step in and assist you with putting together site plans, an understanding of what building is out there, the footprint of the building.
That was completed in July. What I submitted in June. That, because again,
calling it the statutory public notice requirement, okay? And that is somewhere around 28 days based on publication dates, time of last publication before a meeting. There was something that was missed, and that's why there's a special meeting tonight to make sure that we're complying with that. But again, once we have a completed application, then we can do a public notice. If we don't have a completed application, right, with all the materials, because once it hits the papers, the public are going to want to review these things. If we're missing pieces, decisions can't ultimately be made. We can't complete reviews. So again, a special meeting was done to make sure that we could advance the timeline for you. But it is a 60 to sometimes 90-day process. And that's generally dependent upon the applicant and their application, and then the statutory requirements that that have to be followed to comply with the law.
The comments that you made tonight, though, about, you know, the Wi-Fi and some of the other stuff that you have to add to the building in order to make it usable to get it ready to go, tonight was the first night I heard about that. So that would have brought up the question of a building permit. Up until that time, I just assumed you were using the existing building as it sat and that everything else was a conditional use permit. So the more information we would have had on that, you know, like a set of plans that said I'm making, you know, phone changes and computer changes and that type of stuff would have driven some more questions from us.
Fair enough. You know, maybe we should add a question in the conditional use permit that will you be using telephones and computers in operating your business in this new facility? Then we all would have known, I guess. So that's my mistake. Okay. I guess that's all I have. So just so I'm clear then, I've got some next steps should this be approved, and we go from there.
Yes, I have 2 items. Mr. Wolf, was in fact the application for the use permit completed before the public notice hearing?
I'm sorry, I'm echoing.
Okay, was the application completed in full before? I'm reading some specific language. It says application for the conditional use permit must also be complete at the time the notice of the public hearing on the permit is first given. Did that happen?
Satisfy the requirement.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Lazaris, my second thing is after my first set of questions, the city manager did hand me 4 pages here, which appear to be the petitioner's application. So I just want to put it on the record here that I do have this, and I'm going to send it down the line so the rest of the plan commissioners can see it before we move on. The name of the applicant is Todd Oberg. The name of the owner listed for the subject property is Steve Sterwald. That's on the second page here. On the fifth page, there are signatures. The first one, signature of applicant, appears to be that of Todd Oberg. The next one is signature of owner. Looks like it says Steve Sterwald. I apologize if I said that incorrectly. So at least for the procedural requirement, the owner, if he's the registered agent of SJS Holdings, appears to have been in on this application. I'm going to pass this to Mr. Foster so he can look at it if he so desires.
I have some comments. First of all, just going down the location of the property. Number one, it's on a truck route. So this particular truck route, if it's ever connected to State Highway 89 south of town, will be a main thoroughfare for truck traffic 24 hours a day. Number two, I was the previous owner of this property. I ran a tool and die shop with 3 shifts, and many times I was on the 3rd shift. Whereas Crystal Farms is loading semis 24 hours a day with dock doors, reefers running, semi-tractors, and Joe Dog switching semi-trailers. So it is in an industrial park. Also, during the zoning process, we consistently make buffer zones, R3 buffer zones, which are the case in this area. And that is to make a buffer between an I zone and some form of residential or multifamily. All those things are met. During the process of creating the code, I'm so glad Mr. Foster said that there is a vehicle that we can make corrections to this code, because there are significant issues to this code that I've commented on for years already, and we need to bring those ahead of the Plan Commission and act on them and change some of these things, because I don't know what the city council gets for phone calls, but in the last month and a half, my phone's been ringing off the hook because I happen to have been on the Plan Commission 22 years. And they know that I was part of creating this code, and there are significant issues with it that need some modification. Way back when we began this, I was instructed by Mr. Wilkie that the code is developed for fairness for the entire population of the community. So in some of those decisions prior to that, I was mistaken to make decisions based on either common sense or the correct benefit for the use of the property or the property owner. It simply is not the case. It has to be fairness for either the zoning area or the people involved. So that is why it's extremely important for us to make these corrections. I just think that we gotta not be fearful of it, but it would just be a shame to chase somebody else out of the community. It's happened over the course of the last 35 years that we've lost significant large businesses that pay a tremendous part of the tax base, or potentially do. So, yeah, you could look at this like, so what? You know, let them go somewhere else. It's not how I feel. I think we should actually take a really good look at, you know, our decision based on not just how good it is for Todd, but how good it is for the community. And I just think we just need to really rethink how we make some of these decisions. And I am upset. That's all.
May I jump in real quick? You said that perfectly. Thank you, Steve. And I think you aren't the only person who's raised this to me. So you don't need to feel bad or anything like that. There's been multiple small business owners who've contacted me that said that they feel lost at times. They feel surprised by bills they've received. So I just wanted to put that out there in association with your comment because I think something needs to happen. Thank you.
Ms. Lazares, if you could turn your microphone on, please.
Hi, Plan Commissioners, we are still in discussion, and you do have the prepared motion 2181 before you. Is there any further discussion on this request? Or on the prepared motion? Is there anyone who wishes to make a motion concerning motion 2181?
I would like to suggest an amendment under number 1 at the end of that, where it says the petitioner shall meet all code requirements, including those outlined in the planner's memo. I would like it to stipulate a 6 months from occupation.
Mr. Wolfe, are there not timeframes specified in the code for conditional uses and commencement of use?
There's one. There's one that says 1 year we have to inspect. So that would be the one that I would have looked at and said, after 1 year we go back and we make sure. The city council has put on some extra ones and some additional times, but they've extended out much further than the 1 year period. So, but 1 year generally gives him plenty of time to get through the winter, gives time to get all the plannings and the construction taken care of, gives plenty of lead time on any construction requirements.
Then I will change language to stipulate 1 year for the staff to go back and review completion, but to allow occupation and use.
I'm sorry, we're having a hard time hearing
I
you.
second the motion.
Yeah.
You got the motion,
Aye.
correct, Misty?
As long as
We
it
do
wasn't.
have a,
Make that motion formal, Mr. Foster.
Yeah, I did. I request a formal motion to amend number 1 to read the petitioner shall meet all code requirements, including those outlined in the planner's memo within 1 year of occupation, start of occupation and use of the facilities.
Thank you. And you seconded that, Mr. Grady?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
is there? It's been moved and seconded. It's been moved and seconded for the amendment to number 1 on your motion for within 1 year of adding to the number 1 within 1 year of occupancy and use of the facilities. Mrs. Bishop?
Yes, if the city code already allows for the city staff to do the review in 1 year, I have a hard time adding additional language on top of that code that tries to do the same thing. I would rather just let the code stand, and I think that's how I'll come out on this vote, since it does the same thing anyway.
I actually agree with that on the grounds that in the past, we already have granted city staff to implement reviews. There were plan commissions before us that have actually tried to approve the entire city code, and we passed that on many years ago to staff for that very reason, so that they can just take the code and encompass the important information, so that our packet just includes stuff that we need to act on. So I totally agree with that comment.
So does the code actually stipulate that?
We're getting a north-south head nod from the city manager.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm seeing it in front of me.
Mr.
I'm pretty
Drescher?
sure. Yeah, Dan.
I'm looking at them right now to confirm.
Because I know in the past we've been required to do this.
I thought that was just to extend it, not to shorten it, just to verify it, verify that it happens. Okay.
Right.
We'll see what Dan says.
Mr. Drescher, I have here section 660, 195, N.
Yep, I'm coming right up on it.
Okay. N2, I think.
There's an awful lot of discretion in the statement with regard to may. And the statement is that the Plan Commission may review a conditional use permit if any of the following determinations are made by the Plan Commission. 1, the conditional use has not continued in conformity with the city's conditions of approval of the conditional use permit or with any subsequent amendments to the conditional use permit. 2, violations of other statutes, ordinances, or laws. 3, a change in the character of the surrounding area or in the conditional use itself, which has caused the conditional use to become incompatible with the surrounding uses. 4, a change in ownership or tenant. And I don't see a specific timeline. It just gives them, the Plan Commission specifically, the ability to and discretion to review.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. That's why I wanted to add it. That's exactly why I wanted to add it, because I knew that already. So thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Ms. Lazaris.
All right. Is there any further discussion to this motion or second to the to add within 1 year of occupancy and use of the facilities to item number 1?
I already seconded.
Yeah, I know. All right.
So I'd like
Hearing
to
no
add,
further discussion.
Ms. Lazaris, if I may, this is Dan, I'd like to add, under section M of the same chapter and code section, limitations on conditional use permits, number 1 states time limitations. Subject to an extension of time granted by the City Council upon recommendation of the Plan Commission, no conditional use permit shall be valid for a period longer than 12 months unless a building permit and/or occupancy permit is issued and construction is actually begun within that period of time, and is thereafter diligently pursued to completion, or unless a zoning permit is issued and the use commenced within that period. So my question there is how you're going to balance. Mr. Foster, your amendment was based on occupancy, I believe. So in that circumstance, you stated that deconditions must be completed within 12 months of occupancy. And I believe that that does comply with that code section, the time limitations as I read it just now. I think that's important to bring up because if they didn't comply, if you set him up in a circumstance where no action had been taken on the conditional use permit and no occupancy had been achieved during that 12-month period, I think that it would take an extension by the city council and a recommendation by the plan commission to move forward with that valid conditional use permit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does, Dan, but it still puts the onus on us as the plan commission to put that in the stipulations.
I just want to be clear that if you're basing it on occupancy, date of conditional use permit, and then date of occupancy within 12 months, there would be the requirement to have the conditions of the conditional use satisfied.
Right, because the conditional access will be granted by the city council. Oh, how do I want to put this? So it'll be granted by the city council for occupancy, and then it requires them to complete all recommended items by 1 year, or that conditional access is pulled or can be pulled.
And the only issue that I have with that statement is that the conditional use permit itself does not grant occupancy, as was established earlier in the conversation. That is a subsequent process in this circumstance.
Right.
So I want to make sure that all the timelines line up there and it's achievable.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks, Dan. So, with that being said, we do have the motion for amendment, but it is my amendment, so I believe I can make modifications to that amendment as long as I have approval from the seconder to make those changes.
Yeah, I believe in that circumstance that the member that seconded the motion would have the opportunity to withdraw their second, correct?
Right, and he withdrew it and is allowing me to make my changes. So that would change my amendment to read 1 year from the date of the conditional use approval by the council.
I think that's a more appropriate way to approach it based on my reading. Thank you.
Okay, nope, makes sense to me. Thank you, Dan. So that's my amendment. If you still want to second it, it's up to
So
you.
seconded.
Misty, did you get that amendment?
Yeah, I'm just jotting it down, and I was actually writing. I just want to confirm that that was Mr. Grady that made the second on that one.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I can't hear you, Ms. Lazaris.
We do have a revised amendment by Mr. Foster and seconded by Mr. Grady. Any further discussion? All right. There being none, then we'll proceed with a roll call vote on this revised amendment.
Mr. Grady?
Aye.
Mrs. Bishop?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazaris?
Aye.
Motion passed 6-0.
All right, Plan Commissioners, we now have motion. My Plan Commissioners, we now have motion 2181 as amended. Is there a motion to pass this amended motion 2181? That's right. Mr. Grady has made the motion to approve this amended motion. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Holman.
Second. Mr. Holman seconded. All right. Any further discussion? In that case, we'll proceed with roll call vote on the amended motion 2181.
Mrs. Bishop?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazaris?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Grady?
Aye.
Motion passed 6-0.
All right, thank you. Next up is item number 7, recommendations for future agendas. As some of you may know, Mr. Magnuson was previously the vice chairman of the Plan Commission, and he has left. And for the next agenda, I would like to take up election of the vice chairman. Is there anything else we should know about future agendas?
There has been a submittal for a plan development district proposal, and so that will be on the agenda.
All right, very good. Anything else under 7?
I guess I would like to try to figure out how we proceed with talking about the city code, whether it be, as an agenda item at the end of Plan Commission, where we can just openly discuss how we break into it and try to discover or rediscover just some of the shortfalls. I guess rather than try to pinpoint one thing, the city zoning code, if you've seen it in paper form, it's considerably thick. So it took us 5 years approximately to create it, and I just wouldn't know how we would address it word by word without taking the same amount of time. So maybe we should brainstorm a little bit first, and then kind of attack it, maybe a section here or there, because a lot of it is good.
Would you like a discussion item for a future agenda?
Yeah, I think we should begin discussion. And if people have, the plan commissioners have specific things, bring them to the meeting, and we can begin discussing on what we might look into.
Well, what I would say is that when that appears on the agenda, what each of you might do is take a look at the code and just jot down your impressions as to what you might want to see differently, and that might be a good way to start talking about our existing code. All right. Anything further about future agendas? All right. With that, we move on to item number 8, adjournment. Is there a motion?
Mr. Coots will second. Mr. Coots will second.
Motion by Mr. Holman, second by Mr. Coots to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Same sign. We are adjourned.